They said she was cursed. A bride left kneeling in the rain, her white gown soaked, her dreams shattered before the altar. The man who promised her forever had fled, and by nightfall her humiliation was trending online for the world to laugh at. But what the world didn't know was that a stranger was watching from the road, a billionaire whose own heart had forgotten what love felt like. That night, when he stepped out of his car and held an umbrella over her trembling shoulders, neither of them knew it wasn't just an act of kindness. It was destiny, and the beginning of a story that would turn heartbreak into healing and rain into redemption. This is the Umbrella House, a story of love redeemed, of mercy reborn, and of how sometimes the storm doesn't end your story. It begins it. Before we dive in, I want to ask you for one small favor. If stories like this touch your heart, if you believe that love, hope, and second chances still exist, please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It helps this channel grow and tells me to keep creating stories that remind us, even in the rain, there's always light ahead. Back to our story. On this particular Saturday evening in Lagos, the rain was doing exactly that. The Cathedral of Divine Mercy stood against the grey sky like a monument to broken promises. Just hours ago, it had been filled with guests, laughter, and the scent of fresh roses. The kind of wedding that people would talk about for weeks. The kind where every detail had been planned and perfected. Now, the compound was nearly empty. White ribbons hung limp and torn on the iron gates. Rose petals floated in muddy puddles like tiny boats lost at sea. The chairs inside sat in crooked rows, abandoned in haste when the unthinkable happened. And there, on the stone steps leading to the cathedral entrance, knelt a bride. Her name was Amara Okafor, 27 years old. A primary school teacher from Ajugunle who believed in fairy tales, even though life had given her every reason not to. Her wedding gown, once pristine white with delicate beadwork along the bodice that had cost her 6 months of savings, was now soaked through and clinging to her trembling frame. The veil that had taken her sister 3 hours to pin perfectly now hung askew, dripping water down her face. Her makeup had long since dissolved into dark streaks across her cheeks, mascara tracing the path of tears she could no longer feel. But she still clutched her bouquet. White lilies and baby's breath. She held it like it was the only proof that this day had ever meant something. That she had ever meant something. 2 hours earlier, Amara had stood at the back of that cathedral, her heart pounding with joy so intense it felt like it might burst through her chest. She had watched the guests file in, admiring the way the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows. She had heard the choir begin to sing, their voices rising like promises toward heaven. She had waited for the signal to walk down that aisle toward the man she loved. Tund Akindele, the man who had swept into her life like a whirlwind 18 months ago. The son of a wealthy politician from Victoria Island. Handsome, charming, and completely absent when it mattered most. The whispers had started small. Restless murmurs from the front pews. A ripple of confusion moving through the congregation like wind through grass. Then someone's phone rang. Then another. Then the groom's mother, Mrs. Akindele, draped in expensive oso-ebi and enough gold jewelry to fund a small business, stood up abruptly and marched toward the exit, her face twisted in disgust. The best man followed, his eyes refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Then the groomsmen, one by one. Then half the guests from the groom's side. They disappeared like smoke, leaving behind only shocked silence and the awkward shuffling of those who remained. Amara's father, a retired bus driver with calloused hands and humble dignity, had walked slowly down the aisle to where she stood frozen at the entrance. His footsteps echoed in the suddenly too quiet cathedral. He didn't need to say the words. His eyes, red-rimmed and devastated, said everything. Your groom is gone. His family has refused you. It's over before it even began. The guests had stared, some with pity that felt like knives, others with barely concealed schadenfreude, already composing the story they would tell at their next gathering. Phones came out. Camera flashes lit up the cathedral like lightning. The sound of shutters clicking became a soundtrack to her humiliation. By the time Amara stumbled out of the church and into the rain, she was already trending on Twitter. Hashtag jilted in Lagos. Hashtag poor girl rich boy. Memes were being made with her tear-stained face. Screenshots shared across WhatsApp groups. Her pain became entertainment in less than 15 minutes. Strangers who would never know her name felt entitled to judge her worth. Her family had tried to take her home, but she refused. She sent them away, told them she needed air, promised she would be fine. Her mother had clutched her hand and begged her to come home, but Amara couldn't bear the thought of sitting in their small parlor while relatives whispered and neighbors gossiped. She needed the rain. She needed to feel something other than the numbness spreading through her chest. But she wasn't fine. She was drowning. Not in the rain, but in the weight of public humiliation, shattered dreams, and the unbearable question that looped endlessly in her mind like a broken record. What is wrong with me? What made me so unworthy that a man would flee rather than say my name at an altar? So she knelt there, on those cold church steps, and let the rain punish her. Let it wash over her like judgment. Let it blur the world until nothing remained but water and shame and the terrible ache of being unwanted. That's when the headlights appeared. A black Range Rover, sleek and expensive, the kind of vehicle that announced wealth without saying a word, slowed to a stop at the roadside just beyond the church gate. The engine idled quietly, a low purr against the drumming rain. For a long moment, nothing happened. The tinted windows revealed nothing. Then the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. His name was Chukwuma Okoye, though everyone called him Chucks. 42 years old. Self-made billionaire. Owner of Okoye Holdings, one of the largest real estate empires in West Africa, with properties spanning from Lagos to Accra to Johannesburg. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, tailored on Savile Row during his last business trip to London. Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. In his hand, he carried a large black umbrella. Chucks had been driving home from his own engagement dinner, a stiff, formal affair at a five-star hotel on the island where his fiancée, Zainab, had smiled for the cameras and introduced him to her relatives like he was a prize she'd won at auction. The evening had been choreographed down to the minute. Speeches praising their union, toasts to their future. But not once had Zainab looked at him the way his mother used to look at his father before the old man died. Not once had he felt that spark people wrote songs about. He knew the truth. She didn't love him. She loved what he could provide. Security, status, a future without financial worry, access to rooms she could never enter on her own merit. And maybe that was enough. Maybe love was a young man's game, something foolish people chased until reality taught them better. At 42, after building an empire from nothing, after clawing his way up from a one-room apartment in Mushin to penthouses on Banana Island, maybe practicality mattered more than passion. But then he saw her, a bride, alone, kneeling in the rain like a figure from a tragic painting, her white gown glowing in the darkness, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Something about the image pierced through his carefully constructed defenses, through the walls he'd built around his heart to survive the cutthroat world of Nigerian business. He didn't know why he stopped. He didn't know why it mattered. Thousands of people suffered every day in this city, and he couldn't save them all. But before he could talk himself out of it, before logic could override instinct, he was walking toward her, umbrella in hand. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak, but not close enough to intrude. Rain soaked his expensive shoes. "You shouldn't be kneeling in the rain." Amara didn't look up at first. She'd heard footsteps, but assumed they would pass. Everyone always passed. When she finally did look up, slowly, her eyes were hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out everything that made her human and left only a shell. Where else does a woman kneel when life rejects her? The words hit Chuck's harder than they should have. He'd heard desperate words before. Pleas from business partners. Threats from competitors. But this was different. This was the sound of someone who had lost faith in the very concept of tomorrow. He crouched down slowly, his expensive suit absorbing rainwater, and held the umbrella over her head. What happened? She let out a broken laugh, the kind that comes when crying isn't enough anymore. What didn't happen? I woke up this morning believing in forever. I got dressed in this stupid gown. I did my makeup. I practiced my smile in the mirror. I showed up. I believed. Her voice cracked like glass. And none of it mattered. He didn't just leave me. He ran. His mother looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. His family said I wasn't good enough, not rich enough, not connected enough, not from the right family or the right neighborhood. Just not enough. Chucks was quiet for a moment, processing the cruelty of it, the calculated humiliation. Did he give you a reason? Reasons don't matter when someone's already decided you're not worth fighting for, Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. He texted his best man, said his family threatened to disown him, said marrying beneath his class would ruin his political future. She laughed again, bitter and broken. I loved him, and to him, I was just a risk he couldn't afford to take. Chucks felt anger flare in his chest, hot and protective. He'd seen this before. Rich families treating people like commodities, measuring human worth in bank statements and property titles. He'd been on the receiving end of that disdain when he was younger, before he made his first million, before his name commanded respect. He pulled a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and offered it to her, perfectly white, monogrammed with the initials CO. She stared at it like it was a foreign object, something clean in a world that had just proven itself filthy. "Take it," he said gently. She did. She wiped her face, though the rain rendered it pointless. "Why do you care? You don't know me." "I don't know," Chucks admitted. The truth felt strange on his tongue. "But you don't deserve to be out here alone. Nobody does." He offered her a ride. She refused at first, pride flickering in her voice even through the exhaustion. "I can manage." "Can you?" he asked, not unkindly. Before she could answer, a group of teenagers walked past the church gate, phones raised and recording, laughing at the jilted bride. Their voices carried across the compound. "See the mumu way dem leave for altar. She still day there oh. Auntie, go home na." Something inside Amara broke completely. Whatever remaining dignity she'd been clinging to shattered like the bouquet stems in her trembling hands. She stood up, unsteady on her feet, her legs numb from kneeling, and nodded. "Okay." Chucks helped her into the car, his hand steady on her elbow. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The seats were heated. Classical music played softly from the speakers. The silence was overwhelming. Amara sat rigid, staring at her hands, at the engagement ring she'd bought herself because Tund had said he wanted to surprise her later. A lie, probably. One of many. That's when she saw her phone light up with notifications. Dozens of them. Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. Vibrating with the weight of strangers' opinions. She opened Twitter with shaking hands and saw herself. Her face. Her ruined makeup. Her soaked gown. The photo taken from outside the church. Captioned with cruel jokes and mock sympathy. When you shop at Yoba Market, but your man shops at Gucci. Poor thing thought love would pay the bills. This is what happens when you dream above your station. She made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and before she could stop herself, she was crying. Not delicate tears, but the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and uncontrollable. The kind that shakes your entire body. The kind that empties you out completely. Chucks didn't try to console her with empty words. He didn't tell her it would be okay, or that time heals all wounds. He'd lived long enough to know that some wounds leave scars. He just drove, navigating Lagos traffic with practiced ease, giving her space to break apart in the privacy of his car. When they reached her address in Surulere, a modest apartment building with peeling paint and rusty railings, he parked and waited until she composed herself. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere in the distance, a generator rumbled to life. "Thank you," she whispered, opening the door. Her voice was hoarse from crying. He nodded. The world forgets fast. But pain doesn't. Give yourself time. She stepped out into the drizzle and walked toward her building without looking back, her gown dragging in the mud. Chucks watched until she disappeared through the entrance. Then he sat there for a moment, trying to understand why this stranger's pain had affected him so deeply. Why he couldn't just drive away and forget her. Finally, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an envelope. He always kept cash for emergencies. He counted out 200,000 naira, placed it inside, and wrote a quick note on the back in his precise handwriting. For a new start. No strings. You don't have to carry this alone. He walked to her building, climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, found her door, and slipped the envelope underneath. Then he left, wondering if he'd ever see her again. When Amara found the envelope 10 minutes later, she had just stepped out of the shower, her wedding gown in a wet heap on the bathroom floor. She opened it with trembling hands and stared at the money. More money than she made in 3 months of teaching. Enough to change things. Enough to start over. She read the note 3 times. Then she grabbed the envelope and ran downstairs, barefoot, desperate to return it, to refuse the pity she didn't want to accept. But the black Range Rover was already gone, swallowed by Lagos traffic and the endless night. 3 weeks passed. Amara tried to rebuild her life one painful day at a time. She returned to her teaching job at Hope Primary School in Ajugunle, ignored the stares from co-workers who'd seen the viral photos, and deleted all her social media accounts. She blocked Tun's number. She ignored his mother's threatening calls, demanding she return the bride price that had never been fully paid. She refused to use Chuck's money at first. It sat in her drawer like a test of character. But eventually, practicality won over pride. She paid off the debts her family had incurred for the wedding. She bought herself a simple phone. She sent some money to her father for his blood pressure medication. She put the rest in savings. She told herself she would repay him someday. Somehow. Then came the night of the charity auction. It was held at Eco Hotel, hosted by the Okoye Foundation to raise money for youth education initiatives across Lagos State. Amara wasn't a guest. She was hired as temporary event staff through a friend's catering company, serving drinks and clearing tables for extra income. She wore a simple black uniform and kept her head down, invisible among the glittering crowd of Nigeria's elite. Politicians, business moguls, celebrities, people who moved through the world like they owned it. And then she saw him. Chuck stood near the stage, speaking with a group of businessmen in flowing agbadas and expensive watches. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, composed, untouchable. But there was something different too. A tiredness around his eyes. A weight in his shoulders. She froze, tray in hand, debating whether to approach or disappear into the kitchen. Before she could decide, he turned, responding to something someone said, and their eyes met across the room. Recognition flickered across his face. Surprise. Then something softer. Something that looked almost like relief. He excused himself from the conversation and walked toward her, moving through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told he didn't belong anywhere. Amara. Hearing her name from his lips made her heart stutter. Mr. Okoye. Chucks, he corrected gently. What are you doing here? Working, she said simply, lifting the tray slightly as evidence. I needed the money. He studied her for a moment, and she braced herself for pity, for awkwardness, for the kind of discomfort that comes when wealthy people are reminded that poverty exists. But what she saw instead was respect. You didn't hide. No point, she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The world already saw me at my lowest. Might as well let them see me standing back up. Something shifted in Chuck's expression. Admiration. Or maybe recognition. Like he understood something about survival that most people in this room would never comprehend. How are you? Alive, Amara said. Some days that's enough. Over the next hour, they talked in stolen moments between her serving rounds. Brief conversations squeezed between champagne refills and canopy deliveries. He learned she had returned to teaching, that she was rebuilding slowly, that she refused to let shame define her, that she'd used his money wisely and intended to pay him back. She learned he was still engaged to Zainab, though he didn't sound happy about it, that his company was expanding into renewable energy, that he funded scholarships for underprivileged students because he'd once been one himself. That success hadn't made him forget where he came from. At the end of the night, as the event wound down and guests filed out in clusters of laughter and expensive perfume, Chucks found her near the service entrance. I have a proposition. Amara raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I need a personal assistant. Someone organized, resilient, intelligent. Someone who can handle pressure without breaking. I think you'd be perfect for the position. Amara blinked, certain she'd misheard. You don't know me. I know enough, Chuck said. But I'm not offering out of pity. If you want the job, you'll have to earn it. Interview properly with my management team. Prove yourself. This isn't charity. This is business. She stared at him, disbelief warring with hope. Why would you do this? Because I believe people deserve second chances, he said quietly. Especially people who refuse to stay down when life knocks them over. 1 week later, after a rigorous interview with Chuck's senior management team that tested everything from her organizational skills to her crisis management abilities, Amara Okafor became the personal assistant to one of Nigeria's wealthiest men. The first month was overwhelming. Chucks moved through his world with precision and impossibly high expectations. Meetings started exactly on time. Emails required immediate responses. Travel schedules changed without warning. Conference calls happened at midnight with investors in different time zones. But Amara met every challenge. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them. She organized chaos into order. She learned his preferences, his patterns, his moods. She proved herself not just capable, but indispensable. And slowly, quietly, something else began to grow between them. It wasn't attraction. Not at first. It was understanding. Recognition. They were both survivors of different kinds of loss. Chuck's had built an empire, but his personal life was transactional. Zainab, his fiancée, rarely visited his office. When she did, it was to discuss wedding plans or request funding for her boutique or complain about his working hours. There was no warmth, no laughter, just polite negotiations wrapped in expensive perfume and designer clothing. Amara noticed. She said nothing, maintained professional boundaries, but she noticed. Chuck's noticed things too. The way Amara's face lit up when a scholarship recipient sent a thank you letter to the foundation. The way she stayed late to help junior staff meet deadlines even though it wasn't her responsibility. The way she brought him hot tea without being asked when she sensed he was stressed. The way she flinched whenever someone mentioned weddings. They didn't talk about that night in the rain. Not directly. But it was always there, unspoken, like a shared scar that had healed into something that connected them. 6 months into her employment, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon during a routine board meeting, everything changed. Chuck's collapsed. Amara was in the boardroom, taking notes, when he suddenly gripped the edge of the mahogany table and went pale. His eyes lost focus. Before anyone could react, before she could even stand up, he crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Board members jumped from their chairs. Amara was already dialing emergency services, her training from a first aid course she'd taken years ago kicking in. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes. He was rushed to Lagoon Hospital in Victoria Island. Tests were run. Specialists consulted. The best cardiologist in Lagos examined him. The diagnosis was devastating. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. A rare heart condition. Progressive. Fatal without intervention. The heart muscle had thickened abnormally, making it harder to pump blood. The procedure he needed could only be done in Germany by one of 3 surgeons in the world who specialized in this particular surgery. Even then, success wasn't guaranteed. Without the surgery, he had maybe 2 years. With it, he could live a normal lifespan. Maybe. Chuck's instructed his medical team to keep the diagnosis confidential. Only his doctor and Amara knew. He didn't tell Zainab. He didn't tell the board. He continued working as if nothing had changed, pushing through exhaustion, refusing to show weakness in the shark-infested waters of Nigerian business. But Amara saw the truth. The exhaustion in his eyes. The way he gripped his chest when he thought no one was looking. The pills he took discreetly during meetings. 2 weeks later, the board discovered the truth. A leak from someone in the hospital, probably a nurse who sold the information to a gossip blog. The news spread through Lagos business circles like wildfire. Panic spread through Okoye Holdings. Investors grew nervous. Shareholders demanded answers. Stock prices fluctuated. Competitors circled like vultures. And Zainab, his fiancée, quietly began distancing herself. Her calls grew less frequent. Her excuses more transparent. She stopped visiting the office entirely. Within 3 weeks, she'd returned his ring with a carefully worded letter about needing space and reconsidering priorities. The company began to fracture. Key executives started looking for other opportunities. Partners renegotiated contracts. Everything Chuck's had built over 20 years was crumbling because people couldn't see past his mortality. Then Amara did something no one expected. She went to the bank on a Friday morning, telling Chucks she had a personal appointment. She presented the title deed to her late mother's house in Ikorodu, a small bungalow on a quarter plot, the only thing of value her family owned, the only inheritance she had left, the house where she'd grown up, where her mother had braided her hair on Sunday mornings, where her father still lived. She used it as collateral for a loan. 1 million naira. Not nearly enough to fund Chuck's surgery in Germany, but enough to keep his charitable foundation running while the company stabilized. Enough to pay the salaries of the 20 staff members who worked at the foundation. Enough to keep scholarships funded for the 200 students who depended on them. She transferred the money anonymously through the foundation's account, hoping he would never trace it back to her. But Chucks always knew his numbers. He reviewed every transaction personally. When he saw the deposit, he investigated. It took him 3 days to trace it to Amara. When he discovered what she'd done, he didn't call her into his office. He didn't send a professional email. He showed up at her apartment in Surulere at midnight, rain falling softly outside like an echo of the night they met, fury and heartbreak warring on his face. "Why?" he demanded when she opened the door, stunned to see him there. "Why would you do this?" Amara met his gaze steadily, her chin lifted. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing, and I learned that kindness isn't something you repay. It's something you pass on. You lost everything for a man who once found you in the rain," Chuck said, his voice breaking. "That house was your inheritance, your security. And this foundation is yours," Amara replied. "Your legacy. I wasn't going to let it die because people lost faith. I can't accept this." "You already did," she said simply. "The money's spent. Salaries are paid. Scholarships are secured. You can't undo it." Chuck stared at her, this woman who'd been abandoned at an altar, humiliated publicly, who had every reason to be bitter and selfish, and she'd given away the only security she had. For him. For his dream. "Maybe God sent you into the rain to find me," Amara said softly, "so we could both be saved." The words hung between them like a prayer. Chucks left for Germany 1 week later. The surgery was scheduled for early November. It took 9 hours. The recovery was brutal, but he survived. The surgery was successful. The doctors said he'd need to take medication for the rest of his life, maintain a strict diet, avoid excessive stress. But he would live. 3 months passed before he returned to Lagos, thinner but healthier. When he did, everything had changed. The company had stabilized under interim leadership. His health was improving daily. And Amara was gone. She'd resigned quietly 2 weeks after he left for Germany, leaving only a brief letter on his desk. "You gave me a second chance when I needed it most. Now it's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet. Thank you for everything. The foundation money is a gift, not a loan. Build your legacy. I'll build mine. Amara." Chuck searched for her everywhere. He called her number, but it was disconnected. He visited her apartment, but a new tenant had moved in. He asked former colleagues. No one knew where she'd gone. It was like she'd vanished into the same rain that had brought them together, until one Sunday morning, 4 months after his return, when he found himself driving aimlessly through Lagos. His therapist had suggested he reconnect with places that held meaning. Without conscious thought, he drove past the Cathedral of Divine Mercy, the same church where he'd first seen her kneeling in the rain. He didn't know why he stopped. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was fate. He parked and walked through the gates. He heard voices. Children's voices. Laughter. Inside the cathedral hall, a group of about 15 young girls, ages ranging from maybe 12 to 20, stood in neat rows. They were practicing how to walk with confidence. Not the exaggerated runway walk, but the simple, dignified walk of someone who knows their worth. At the front of the room, guiding them with patience and warmth, was Amara. She wore a simple yellow dress that made her skin glow. Her hair was natural, shaped into a beautiful halo of curls. No expensive styling. No elaborate makeup. She looked lighter, freer, happy in a way he'd never seen before. Stand tall, she was saying. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you're exactly who God made you to be. Walk like you matter. Because you do. Chuck stood in the doorway, watching. One of the girls noticed him first, nudging her friend. Then another looked. Soon Amara felt the shift in attention and turned. Their eyes met. Time stopped. The girls whispered among themselves, sensing something significant was happening. Amara's breath caught. Chuck's walked forward slowly, deliberately, carrying something in his hand. A black umbrella. The same one from that rainy night 10 months ago. "I came to return what you left behind," he said softly, his voice carrying across the hall. Amara's eyes filled with tears. "What's that?" "Hope." The girls watched, wide-eyed and completely silent, as Chucks reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. The same white handkerchief he'd given her on the church steps. She'd washed it, pressed it, kept it all these months. He knelt down, right there in the cathedral hall where she was teaching girls to walk with dignity, and looked up at her. "I built an empire, Amara. Buildings and businesses and bank accounts. But I never built a home. Not a real one. Not until I met you." His voice was steady but raw with emotion. "You taught me that love isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice." Amara's hands trembled as she covered her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Marry me," Chuck said. "Not because I saved you. Not because you saved me. But because we saved each other. Because you make me believe that second chances aren't just things that happen to us. They're things we choose. Every single day." Amara pulled him to his feet, not caring about protocol or propriety. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." The girls erupted into cheers, jumping and screaming with joy. Rain began to fall outside, gentle and soft, tapping against the windows like nature's applause. 3 months later, in a private courtyard behind the cathedral, surrounded by the young women Amara mentored and the staff who'd watched them fall in love slowly over coffee and late-night work sessions, Chucks and Amara were married. There was no grand reception, no celebrity guests, no social media coverage, no 500-person guest list. Just 2 people who had learned that sometimes the storm that ruins your dress becomes the rain that waters your destiny. They honeymooned nowhere extravagant. Instead, they bought a large property in Lekki, a sprawling compound with multiple buildings. They transformed it into a shelter, a safe house, a place for people who needed refuge from life's storms, a place where brides who'd been abandoned could find support and counseling, where young people without homes could find safety and education, where single mothers could find community, where anyone carrying unbearable weight could come in from the rain and find rest. They called it the Umbrella House. Amara ran the programs. Chucks funded the operations. Together, they built something that would outlast both of them. A legacy not of wealth, but of mercy. And on rainy nights, when storms rolled across Lagos and thunder shook the walls, when new residents arrived seeking shelter, Chucks and Amara would stand on the porch together, watching the waterfall, holding the same black umbrella that had brought them together. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive in sunshine. Sometimes it arrives in the storm, when you're at your lowest, kneeling in the rain, convinced you're unworthy of rescue. And sometimes, the person who stops to offer you shelter isn't a prince from a fairy tale. He's just another broken soul learning that the strongest foundations aren't built on perfection. They're built on mercy, second chances, and the quiet courage to believe that your story isn't over just because the world said it was. Amara had waited for love at an altar, and love, in its own time, in its own way, had finally waited for her too. Not at the altar she'd expected, not in the fairy tale she'd imagined, but in the rain, where all true things are revealed, where pride dissolves and pretense washes away, where two broken people can meet in their brokenness and decide to build something whole. The Cathedral of Divine Mercy still stands in Lagos. The same steps where Amara once knelt in despair now see young women come and go with hope. Some of them wear wedding dresses. Some wear business suits. Some wear school uniforms. But all of them walk a little taller, a little stronger, because someone once showed them that being abandoned doesn't mean being unworthy. And somewhere in Lekki, the umbrella house stands with its doors open, lights glowing warmly in every window, ready to shelter the next soul who needs to come in from the rain. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Please take a moment to subscribe. It's free, but it means everything. It tells me to keep creating stories that remind us that love, mercy, and second chances still exist. And if you've ever been through a storm and found light again, drop a heart in the comments. Your story might give someone else hope.